just maintaining that level of kedusha starts in the mind.
Yeah,
God,
bro. A lot of women I know need to be reading that Path of Just too, man.
right.
Reflecting that behavior, man.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, well, I mean, it's we're working through it, and the thing is, we're building new cognitive patterns. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? Like new ways of thinking, new ways of perceiving reality, and it's such a gift because it like shows us how vast God is. Right? God made us in a certain way, and you spend 20, 30 some years of your life knowing yourself a certain way, and all of a sudden you get introduced to some new information and some new ideas, and then now you like seeing life in a whole new way, right? And this is the sweetness of the Torah, right? The sweetness of the Torah is being able to find out who you are, right? Because so much of who we are is like shaped by definitions created by society. And then the Torah, and you learn the Torah, you learn the ways of God, then you're like, oh wait, there's different ways to define things. There's different ways to define experiences. So now there's a different way of defining experiences. Then you're like, oh wait, well, I could define experiences different by myself too, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you could go even further and say, yeah, I could define myself not even just from the experiences of not just experiences of 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 how I understood them, but even re-experience things in a new way, right? And so that idea comes from being able to learn the Torah. The Torah allows us to take scenarios, situations, ideas, moments, and see them from multiple perspectives, right? Same thing by our life. And the more that we use that intellectual framework that we build in the Torah through the Kedusha from Hashem, we're able to go back into our lives and re-experience things in our lives. But so that's what happened. So this is what happened. This is why this happened this way. Okay, now I get it. And now you remove so much pain and suffering. It was a guy I was talking to on one of these apps, and he's kind of like a street guy type of thing, and he was just saying like how many things he did in his life, just trying to show he's a tough guy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of guys that have never been able to just start fresh.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we don't realize that people don't know the concept of tshuva, right? And the fact that like you could just sit back and you could look at your life and say, hey, you know what? You know, I made a mistake and that's not the end of me. You know what I mean? And being able to that's a lot of guys in prison, bro. That's a lot of guys locked up, bro. They're just like, they don't know about, you could just repent, dog. It's all good. You know what I mean? A lot of people did stuff, it's like, man, like, well, a lot of guys, I knew, but I was in hip hop, it's like, when I say hip hop, I'm just saying I was in the hood, and, just, a lot of people don't realize all you have to do is just ask God for forgiveness, and make a vow to never do it again. And it's really that easy. In that situation that happened, there's a lot of people who were involved or different people involved, whatever it was, but that was also part of their tikkun too as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's a collective experience, right? And so it's just being able to take responsibility, for your part, for my part. Anyways, so that's just the idea on that. We're going back into Masecta Brachot, and we're learning Brachot because Berachot is Berachot. It's the first Masechta of the whole Shas, the whole Talmud, right? And so we have to ask ourselves, why did they start the Talmud with this Masechta Berachot, right? And not only why did they start it with Masechta, because you understand it was all compiled, right? It was compiled, right? Yehuda Nasi compiled all the Mishnahs from all the different traditions in Babylon. They compiled all of them and they made the Talmud. They made it into an order that a person who's not around, there's no base of Mikdash, there's no Kohanim, there's no Karbonos, there's no nothing. So they would be able to put it together they'll be able to put it together and to be able to read this teachings and be able to maintain a lifestyle that will make them worthy to be redeemed at the end of days. That's what the Talmud is at the end of the day. Like people can say this, that, this, the rabbis this, the Pharisees, all this. Okay, cool. Bottom line is that their responsibility was to deal with a disaster in a situation that was beyond logic, which is like, how do you maintain a system of thought that allows the coming of Mashiach into the world for all of humanity? And how do you able to do that at the same time that the system that you originated from is no longer here?
Mm.
And so that's what they were dealing with in Babylon, right? That's what they were dealing with. That's what Ezra later was dealing with. You know what I'm saying? This is the dilemma. So people come and they criticize, oh, the Talmud is, all right, what do you want them to do? Right, so everything's over, the temple's, so that's how your JC narrative works. So your JC narrative works because you think we went out of business, right? You think we went out of business when the temple fell. No, that's when we had to go in diaspora and to elevate sparks. But you don't know about the sparks, right? You don't know about the sparks going back to Adam Rishon and the original Chet that are imbued around the world, right? And so the Jewish people had to go in diaspora, perform mitzvot to elevate those sparks from the ground, from those environments. They picked them up. You see a shul somewhere, Jews are keeping the Torah, reading Torah. We think those sparks in our whole community is being elevated. It's like we learned by Yaakov. Yaakov was able to elevate the sparks in Eretz Israel without even having to travel, just by learning the Torah. So anytime, wherever you see the Jews at, Spain, Morocco, whatever, there were sparks there from Adam Rishon, and those sparks have to be elevated in order for the Mashiach to come. Facts, right? And so like that dynamic is what we're working off of. So if that's the case, where you're saying the whole story's over with this whole thing about the sparks, what does that mean? So the Jews are out. The base of Mikdash is over. And so what about all the sparks that exist in humanity? Oh, we don't believe in those sparks. They got canceled out too. When JC came, the sparks that canceled, and I keep it real. And I say this. When I first got into this whole process and I was with the Kabbalah Center, I learned that the story of JC, just like the story of the church, was made up. The story of JC is really Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Akiva's story, both mixed.
Mm-hmm.
Rabbi Shimon was running from the Romans, hiding, because he was rebelling against them and fighting against the other rabbis. That's Rabbi Shimon. That's why him and his son went and hid, and they eventually buried themselves, and they revealed the Zohar. They were fighting against the Jews that were, siding with the Romans. Rabbi Akiva also was speaking against.
Mm-hmm.
And they sacrificed them in front of everybody. They skinned them alive. So they took those two narratives and just added a cross and put a guy on it.
Especially with the son of Judah, son of Joseph, both Mashiachs blending in. Yeah. It's
You know what I'm
interesting.
saying? It's a nice story. It's beautifully done. But now what you're saying is, if that was the case, how does that work? How does that mechanism work in Shemaim, the heavens, the galaxy, the whole universe, design, the Insof, all that? How does that work? Because you're now saying there's a whole new system. There's a new Bria. There's a whole new Bria. So if there's a new Bria, explain it to us. How does it work? Oh, we ain't thinking about that. We just say you ain't got to do no more mitzvahs. JC is here. Just believe in him. Believe. Have faith. So I'm just saying, so that's why the studies that we're going into are so important, because without that, we wouldn't even have the questions to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Like, bro, I grew up, in a Muslim house. Show me about the Islamic calendar. How does it work? What is that mechanism at? The Islamic calendar is a totally lunar calendar.
It can be very chaotic.
Yeah. So just saying, but this is the problem. No, this is the problem. They hold that Shlomo, David, Isaiah, Ezekiel, all these people, they said they were all prophets, right? They accept it. They follow that. So if you're Muslim and you're saying that you follow the prophets of the Torah, They follow the solar lunar calendar because it's the only way they can have seasons and have the festivals. The festivals and the seasons are one. So the only way you can have it is by having leap years and all these things. So if you're holding by that, what are you doing now? And if you're doing something separate, where's the Shefa? The Shefa comes down in Nisan, right? It comes down in ER. It comes down these different times. Sivan, all these different times. This is when the Shefa comes down. Like, so these are the harvesting seasons. It's connected to the seasons, and the seasons are connected to the Earth's rotation with the moon and the sun, and those are reflective of the galaxies above them, and the galaxy and the universe is above them, and they're all in coordination. So if all these things in coordination, what are you saying? When you come in with the lunar calendar, and if you haven't took that in consideration, please explain to me your 5 times a day praying. Where does that come from? It doesn't even say it in the Quran. It's a hadith that talks about this. And then you go into the Quran itself. I'm not dissing. I love everybody. I love Muslims. Okay, I got Muslim relatives. Grew up that way. I'm not a hater. I didn't leave. I didn't become a Jew because I hated Islam. I became a Jew because the Torah invoked me, and I later found out that's my heritage. It was not Islam. We were not Muslim. We were Jews. That's what we were. You know what I'm saying? And it's cool that Islam had one God and had reminiscences, and we connected to that idea because it's in our mind. But that's the proof of our holiness. The fact that Black people only had access to Islam and they went to that when they had the opportunity, like that's a proof of our Yiddishkeit. That's a proof of us being descendants of Israelite tribes. It's a proof of that. We didn't even read Arabic. We just knew it was one guy. So it's just saying. So when I got into that, I was just like, man. And then the Quran itself, it wasn't even written by their prophet. It was written years after he died. Some people say 30 years, some people say 70 years, some people say less. But either way, he never told them to do it. He was never commanded to write a Quran. He was never commanded. They did it because they thought they would lose the information. So people could believe whatever they want. I'm not mad at it. I'm not hating. But I'm saying let's go into the facts, though. The hadith that all the Muslims follow. Oh, we follow the hadith. The hadith says it. The Sunnah says it. Bro, the hadith was written 250 years after their prophet died. A guy by the name of Bukhari went around Mecca and Medina. He collected information. Okay, and those became the hadiths that they follow. So he went and said, hey, what did your great-great-grandparents say the prophet used to do in Mecca or people in Medina? People, they said, lived in the area. They said, oh, he did like this, he did like that. And he wrote it down. That's a hadith. No prophecy, no nothing, just hearsay. And they follow it. I'm dealing with the Mishnah. The Mishnah is holding by Babylon. Mm. The Mishnah is what the Great Assembly used. Right? With the Great Assembly was using as a byproduct of the generation of the prophets. The prophets are a byproduct of the generation of the elders. The elders are a generation, a byproduct of the generation of Yehoshua to Moshe on Mount Sinai. I don't know about this Bukhari stuff. That's just me. That's just me. I'm not mad at anyone else. You do what you got to do. Do it. Make it happen. Love, peace. I love you. But I'm just saying, at the end of the day, these are real questions that I had. And I traveled around the world, bro. I lived in Mecca, in Medina. I went to Hajj, bro. You know what I'm saying? I went there and I lived there in Mecca, Medina. I lived there and met with their scholars and asked them all these questions from what I had at the Kabbalah Center. I was like, bro, I got to make sense of this. So I spent my money, and I spent like almost over a year traveling to Mecca, Medina, and also Egypt. Bro, fools didn't have answers, dog. Fools did not have any answers. They didn't even thought about the question of Kabbalah brought, or the sages. They never even thought about it, bro. To them, that's forbidden thought. Mm. And that's the basis of why. So why are you doing what you're doing then? If that's forbidden thought, so how do you know what you're doing? What is that? We just do it?
Where the roots at?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm supposed to spend my life with that. Like, okay, I get it. My parents got into it. They're inspired. They're in college, but I mean, I'm going to do that. I mean, I don't know if they put so much thought into it the way I did. They needed black pride back in the day. They were getting beat down in the '70s. It wasn't easy. It gave them strength. Very nice. I agree. One God, God, but bro, it's a testament to who we are. You know what I'm saying? And so the point is just saying that, like, so that's this process that we're in. When we're learning the Gemara, we're learning these things. It's like, bro, what are these other spiritual systems based off of? If you don't have a calendar, bro, like how do the congregants get shefa? How do you receive kedusha for your soul? And on top of it, God already commanded a calendar in Exodus. We're going to come up to it very soon.
Mm-hmm.
So, why your Khalifa overrules God? See what I'm saying? Your Khalifa, your leader comes and creates a new calendar because it makes more sense to him, and that overrules the Torah. He never even asked himself these questions. Anyways, so let's go into Berachot, and appreciate the sages as we figure this system with the Shema. Okay. Okay. So, okay. So it's like this. So he says like this. He says at the end of Berachot 2a, it says like this. The Gemara discussed proof offered in the Breita, right? Umi my de high. So he says he discussed the proof offered in the Breita. From where do we know that the phrase "and the sun sets" refers to the complete setting of the sun, and therefore it is purified? Referred, sorry, is refers to the fact that okay. So he's asking this question. So here's a Breita. He says he discussed offered in a Breita. He said he wants proof. From where do we know that this phrase "and the sun sets" refers to the completing of the sun setting, and therefore it is purified? Refers to the fact that the day is pure and the sun sets and it is purified. And he says it is one phase, meaning that the sun will set and the air will clear and the stars will emerge. Okay, so that's what he leads off here. So he says, "Dilima be'at ma'oro." She says, perhaps the expression "the sun sets and is purified" refers to the very beginning of the sunset and the setting of the light, according to an explanation that what does the expression "and it's purified" means. It means that a person will become purified after immersion. He will be waiting. Okay, so it's important to understand how this is reading. Okay, so you have the Gemara, which we're learning, and these are the key words, right? So the dilema, like perhaps, right? But it's filling in the small words in between. Those are commentaries. They could be Rashi, they could be other people. Like they could be Tosfos. You see at the end of this is Tosfos. So these are commentaries, right? And so the commentaries is helping us understand what's being expressed, right? So it's important when you're reading to understand that there's actually the Gemara, which is the bold print, and then the light print you see here is the commentaries. So let's see what they have here. So they have a Rashi here in English. Okay. So Rashi says like this. So he says, perhaps the meaning is when the sun rises, the sun should shine on the eighth day, and the man should make it purify himself by bringing his korban that and that he can eat. Whatever. Okay, fine. He's talking. He's just explaining what's being said here in terms of the issue. But it's important to read it that way. So these are the two things. So the Gemara's in the boat, everything's in line. So he's saying it. So he says perhaps. So it starts off. So he says the expression of the sun. So they're trying to understand. There's a pasuk up here that we skipped over, but it talks about this idea of. It's going to go back, but I don't want to go back too far. We got to do review. It's called Chazara. We got to do it. All right. So, anyways, it's like this. So he's saying. So the Gemara is saying like this. The Gemara is trying to understand this verse, right? This statement rather, right? It's saying that there's a statement that's saying that the statement says, like it says at the end of this thing, right? Because we understand. He says, discuss the Gemara discusses a proof offered in that Breita. So he asks the question, where do we know that the sun sets refers to the completing of the sun setting, and therefore it is purified, right? Referred to the fact that the day is pure, right? So the question is, they're trying to understand where they're trying to understand where does this come from, right? And so he comes back and says, perhaps the ilma bi'ad rodhu umayit tahar gavara, gavara. So he says perhaps the expression "in the sun sets and it is purified" refers to the very beginning of the sunset. So they're trying to understand what the phrase means. They haven't necessarily told us where it comes from, but they're going over what it could mean, right, in this context. So it's important to understand the flow of Gemara, right? There's a flow of the Gemara to understand like what the Gemara is trying to communicate to us, and every sentence is important because every sentence is a world and it means something. It's distinct, but within it, but it's also part of this collective conversation. So he says, so they're trying to understand. So perhaps what it means is that the sun is setting that purifies, and according to the explanation, he said, according to the explanation, what does the expression "and it is purified" mean? And he answers the question. It means that a person will become purified. So this is what he's trying to understand from the verse. After immersing in the mikvah, he will wait until the beginning of the sunset, and only then will he be able to eat the truma. So that's the Mishnah, if you remember that. So he says, Amar Rabba Bar Rav Shela im kina lema kara veyitar. So he says, Rab Abba Bav Shliya said, if so, if that's the case, if the way you understand this is the case, and it is purified means that the priest goes to purify himself, then let the verse say ambiguously, in that he will become purified. Since the Torah does not employ the language, the conclusion is, what is the meaning of this expression? What is purified? So he says the Torah doesn't say this explicitly on this verse, right? It doesn't say explicitly on this verse, right? So if it says by what you're saying, why doesn't the Torah just say it explicitly? So he doesn't accept that answer, right? He says it means the day is pure, so no residue will remain. As the people say, consequently, that the sun has set and the day is purified. So they're saying, but even though we're trying to understand this time to the Shema and different days, understand what's being said. The purification that happens on the completion of a day, right? In the newness, in the beginning. So the Gemara is like so profound that you can literally learn lesson upon lesson upon lesson with something that's not even necessarily related to the main subject, right? So you're just getting this idea like the day is purified, right? And understanding that it's purified, right? It says Be Amarava Ha De Rabba Bar Rav Shelavela. So he says, but in Eretz Israel, they did not hear this explanation given by Rabba Bar Rav Shliya. So they're saying, so some people heard this explanation, right? Some people heard this explanation. So what is his explanation? His explanation is, hey, he's saying if it means this, why isn't it saying explicitly, right? So he's saying, so from here, the way he understands it is that the residue, right? The residue of the day remains, as the people say, consequently, the day has set and the day is purified. So he has an explanation that's not necessarily different, but the reasoning is different, right? And all these details, you sit down because like normally what we'd be doing right now, we'll have a notepad out and we'll be very clear on all the different arguments that are being made right now, right? And we'll be very clear on the line. Right now, we're just going through it broadly because you're going to probably read this Masechta another, God willing, 1,000 times throughout your life, if not more. And so we're just going through it. But if we were really learning it, we would go down every argument, understand what is really being said here. What is Rav Shliya saying that's different than the rabbis who spoke earlier, right? And where do they disagree at and where are they similar, right? I'm just saying it outside because we're just going through it and I'm familiar with this particular Gemara. Okay, so anyways, so he says in the West, Eretz Israel, they did not hear this explanation from Rabbi Bar Shliya. He says they raised a dilemma. Does this expression, the sun sets, and refers to the actual setting of the sun, does okay, so this is a very important point. This is first of this. He says in Eretz Israel, they did not hear the explanation of Rabbi Bar Shliya. So that's a very important point in terms of Judaism, right? There's different opinions, there's different ideas that exist all over the Jewish world. There's different understandings, different traditions, how things were passed on. And there's some places that didn't ever hear certain perspectives. They didn't have the internet, they didn't have social media, they didn't have WhatsApp app, right? They didn't have Zoom. So it's saying so now we're learning that there is an idea that exists, that there's some places that heard certain explanations and there's places that didn't, right? So that's just an important thing in terms of understanding halacha, menhagim, understandings, everything, right? Stringencies, who wrote. So he says in the rise, he said, so they raised the dilemma. Does the expression the sun sets refers to the actual setting of the sun, and does and it is purified by the day clear away, or perhaps it refers to the setting of the sun at sunset, which in the case, the meaning of it is purified. This refers to the purification of the person. In other words, in Eretz Israel, they attempted to clarify the halakha based on the biblical passages, but were not able to do so. So this is another concept. So some people had clarity in certain areas on this particular point, and they never heard Rav Shliya, right? They never heard of him, right? Or at least they never heard of his explanation, right? So the rabbis who was in Eretz Israel were trying to understand what the halacha is on this pasuk, and they were unable to understand it. So that's another thing, right? So there's places where people understand that people don't, which is a very deep idea. So it says Ve Hadar Fatula Varayata. So he says ultimately they resolved the dilemma from a brisa. Okay, so there's a resolution. So it was taught in a brisa that in the time of the recitation of the evening Shema corresponds to the time of the priests were permitted to eat a truma. We just saw that earlier, right? A sign for the emergence of the stars. Therefore, the deliverance from here that the sun sets refers to the completion of the sunset. And the expression, and it is purified, means by the day clears always, as the sages in Babylon have concluded. So he says like this. So he says like this. So the dilemma is like this. So some of the rabbis saw it this way. Some rabbis, Rav Shlita saw it in this particular frame of reference, and he understood it in this way. And you have the rabbis in Eretz Israel that couldn't come up with a conclusion at all. And so the Gemara says eventually they rectify it by a brisa that talks about the truma for the priest. So now we're understanding the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah that explains the during the time of the priest wasn't just a thing that was just incorporated, right? But rather it was a mechanism that we use to bring two different dilemmas together, right? A perspective that existed outside of Eretz Israel and a perspective inside of Eretz Israel, and they brought a brisa that was able to bring it both together I'm assuming here in the Sabish in Babylon. So he says, our Mishnah says, Ve'amar, Mishnah ha, sorry, Shehachonim Nika Nasim Leah Akol. So he says, in our Mishnah, the master said that the beginning of the time for recitation is of the evening of the evening Shema, from the time where the priest enter and partakes in the truma. Right? We just talked about that. The Gemara raises a contradiction in this opinion, right? You hear see the small print. The Gemara raises the contradiction in this opinion from the brisa that states that the time of the recitation is of the evening. The Shema is from when a poor person enters to eat bread. with salt until he rises from his meal. What's going on here? So now the Gemara brings another idea, right? So this opinion of a Braita states. So they're trying to say the Brisa that was brought earlier, right? The Brisa, the idea, the Mishnah that's outside of the Talmud, the Brisa, right? That Brisa that they utilized to create an understanding between the rabbis in Eretz Israel who couldn't understand this halacha on how to do it, and then also Rav Shlia, right? Was this idea of being able to bring this Brisa that says actually it's the truma that the Kohen eats, and the timing of the time of the when the Kohen eats is the mechanism to understand when the nighttime actually starts. When you can do this particular Maisa during Erev, right? During when the sun sets, the afternoon, right? During this time, this is the idea, right? So you say the Shema by it like this during this time, right? And so they bring the idea of the truma from the priest, right? And so now our Mishnah, the master says this thing. So the Gemara, so the Gemara brings potentially the Gemara raises a contradiction. So it challenges this idea that is actually from the Kohanim or the priest and the Truma. And what does it say? It brings an opinion from another Brisa. And what does this other Brisa say? This other Brisa says, sorry, the other Brisa says that the time is from when a poor person eats his bread with salt until he rises from his meal. That's what he's saying by a poor person. He said, why poor? Now, the thing we got to understand about the concept of a poor person, what does it mean about a poor person? Why a poor person? Why just anybody? Anybody eats, right? But a poor person has a set time at night, right? Because they have a certain amount of food, they have limited amount of resources. And so at evening, that meal, if they schedule the meeting, if they schedule the meal, closer to the time of the evening, it'll be on the stomach, right? So he says, on account of his poverty, he cannot afford. Oh no, this is a separate point. No, he's talking about something separate. Hold on, let's see. No, they'll have okay. So anyway, so that's the thing, right? So he says on this particular time, he says that so he's saying over here. So what is the person's poorness? How does that connect, right? So he says like this: on account of his poverty, he cannot afford official light. Therefore, he takes the evening meal while there is yet sufficient light. So it's not saying like I was saying. I was saying because this is a set time and this covers his evening meal and it suffices his stomach as he goes to sleep. But they're saying no. He says for the first to the sleep in the dark. He says it's mentioned Rabbi Eliezer says who is very poor, who's lying in a dark according to the length. So that he's saying the reason why a poor person eats directly when the sun is going down because he only has candle lights for a certain amount of time and he has to eat, right? So he wants the sunlight. He doesn't want to eat in the dark. So he says Sefer Vedai Gam Ligal Galigal. So he says Natanim Nitanim. Sorry. Amatat Nitim. Sorry. So it says like this. So he says the Gemara begins its analyzation by clarifying whether there's an actual contradiction here. Okay. So you're saying, is there a contradiction? Okay, you're saying by the priest, because the priests come and when the sun sets, they go to the mikvah, and when they come out of the mikvah, they're purified, and they do that. And so that's the time they go to the mikvah, so that's the time, and when the night begins. And then so he says the other point that was just brought by the Gemara says, no, but what about a poor person who also eats by this time? It could also be when a poor person in the dynamic. I don't really understand the poor person fully, but we'll see. I understand it's the same timing, but it's the idea of the mitzvah of truma, right? And so it's the mitzvah of the Shema. So that's why I understand it by the Kohanim. But so the thing by the thing by the thing by the The poor person, I understand the poor person has only a certain amount of light, but why would that be a mechanism to understand fulfilling of a mitzvah? Right? Okay, he's eating, but he's eating out of it's a different shita, it's a different thing. All right, so I want to understand. So he says the Gemara begins in analyzing by clarifying whether there's an actual contradiction here. Maybe there's not even a contradiction to begin with. Even though the Gemara says it's a contradiction, they brought one, but maybe it's not. So he says whether different expressions are begin to employ to describe the same thing. The latter cause of the brisa, which establishes that is a recitation, is with a poor person. Is the latter one certainly disagrees with our Mishnah, since a poor person clearly is not continuing eating until the end of the first watch. This brisa certainly contradicts our Mishnah. So he's saying the issue, the point by the brisa, a point by the Mishnah that we learned earlier when it says by the Kohanim, it talks about the first watch, right? From the time when the sun goes down to midnight, right? That will be the first watch. So that's the connection here. He says, but if you're saying is by someone who has a meal, he's a limited amount of candle lighting, how would that connect to the idea of the first watch? She's saying, so this will contradict the idea of the Mishnah. So how can you bring this as a proof? He says, certainly the Mishnah disagrees with our Mishnah, since a poor person clearly does not continue eating until the end of the first watch. This brayta certainly contradicts our Mishnah with regards to the clause, the first clause in the brayta. However, which establishes the beginning of time for the recitation of the Shema. Shall we say that it disagrees with our Mishnah? So he's saying, does this idea of the people eating before, with the candle lighting, the limited amount of candle, assuming that's the reason why. This is what they said. We don't know if that's the reason why the food is being example, but we're assuming that the poor person has eaten exactly when the sun is setting, and they light their candles because they only have a certain amount of time. Okay. So he says, La ani ve kohen. Chad she'ura, who? She'ura. Yep, she'ura. So he says, if the Gemara immediately rejects this idea. No, the time when a poor person eats, and the time when a priest is purified and permitted to partake in the truba are one and the same. Okay, so he says there's no contradiction. It's the same thing. There's obviously different reasoning around it, but it's the same thing and they don't contradict each other. So he says, Zu'ura minihu me matai mad kilim lekarot lekaat shema baravit. So he says, it's Aramaic. He says, Be'aravit. It's not Arvit. Anyways, so he says, the Gemara raises a contradiction from Tosfos. When does one begin to recite the Shema? So wait, hold on, maybe we can see. Let's see what it says. Okay, so he says the Gemara raises a contradiction from Tosfos. From where does one begin to recite the Shema in the evening? From the time where we enter to eat their bread at Shabbat Eve. This statement is of Rabbi Meir. So this is an interesting point. So Rav Meir, as you know, Rav Meir Balanes, humongous Kabbalist, did miracles, changed reality. So many stories about Rabbi Meir Balanes, Rabbi Kiva student, right? And also a convert, meaning his parents did not have the background. I mean, Rabbi Kiva's parents were people who did not grow up with the tradition either, and they also did what you call a convert. So just interesting. A lot of the Torah that we have today, the modern day Torah, was shaped by converts. Shemaiah and Neftalia, Shemai Hillel's teachers, Rabbi Meir, Balnes, Rabbi Akiva, and many other people. Onkelos, as people know. Just shout out. We should love our converts. We should be kind to them. Okay, so it says like this. So Rabbi Meir says, okay, they asked the question. The Gemara asked the question, what do we know by this evening stuff? And so Rabbi Meir says, from the time when people eat their bread on Shabbat evening. So he brings Shabbat into the conversation. He says, no, the Shema is when people eat their bread from after davening on Shabbos, this is the time you should do it. So it's in that still that first that first what they call it, the first frame, right, of the evening, right? And so it says, so that's what Rabbi Meir says. As do in our Mishnah, the rabbis say from the time that the priests partake in their truma. So they're comparing Rabbi Meir's statement to what was said in the Mishnah by the other rabbis with the truma, a sign which is the emergence of the stars. Although there is no explicit proof that the emergence of the stars is when one may begin to recite the Shema. There is just an allusion in the book of Nehemiah to the fact that the emergence of the stars is generally considered the beginning of the night, as it is stated here. This is like unbelievable conversation. He's saying, what is this idea originally? He said there's a hint in the verse of Nehemiah that talks about the emergence of the star being the beginning of the night, and this is where the whole idea comes from, right? And so Rabbi Meir says that no, that yeah, he doesn't say no. He says, well, the way I was taught, his tradition that he was taught from his teachers, is that hey, it was when the when we would normally eat challah on Shabbos night. That's when you say Shema. What's the problem? And then they said, well, this is like Rabbi Meir is similar to what the rabbi said in the Mishnah, which is by the Truma and the Kohanim. But the Gemara says it's not clear. How do we know? How do we know? You hear the Jews asking, how do we know? Rabbi Meir said, the rabbi said, everyone asks a question, and then everyone makes a point, and the regular Jew could still ask a question, and all of them, how do they know? Right? This is the system of thought you want to be in. How do they know? These are supposed to be the greatest of the greatest. This is the prophets. How do they know? It's not just God said, right? And so he says, and in the book of Nehemiah is the fact that the emergence of the stars is the beginning of the night. As it is stated in regards to the building of the walls in Jerusalem, we performed the work in the half of them grasped their spears from dawn into the emergence of the stars. It says in Nehemiah. And it is said in Nehemiah that it is the night that we may guard, he says that in the night they may guard, that they may be a guard to us, and by day and may labor in the day. There is an assertion that the day ends in the emergence of the stars. So this is where the whole concept comes from, right? Remember, when we first started off, we were just trying to understand what does it mean to lay down. So when it says when to lay down, then we have to go into the idea of night. What is the idea of night? There's different levels, different sections of the night. But what night is it kosher to start doing the Shema? And what's the latest point? So now we're going through this whole discussion of the night. So he says, even before analyzing these sources, the Gemara seeks to clarify a confusing element in the Tosfos. Tosfos being Rashi's, which are Rishonim, right? The Gemara was written by Tanai. I mean, the Mishnah was written by Tanai. The Gemara was discussions of the Amoraim, right, on the Mishnah, and the Rishonim are the individuals that, like Rashi, Tosfos, other people that reconcile all this information and how we apply it today. And later Rabbanim came and organized it into what we understand the halakha that we follow now. So he says in their biblical proof. He says their biblical proof. He says he wants proof. The Gemara is seeking proof, clarifying the confusing element in the Tosfos. In the Bible's proof, the rabbis do not suffice with one verse, but rather we say they cite an additional verse. What is added by the use of it? Okay. What is added by this use of? And it says, it seems superfluous as the entire proof appears in the first verse. All right, so he brings another verse. They're asking, why is he bringing this other verse? And he's saying it's superfluous because they're going to bring another verse. Anyway, if we can remember, we're going to leave off here because we got to go to Kav HaYasher, or we're going to be here for hours. You see where it's going, bro. Like we're out of here, bro. This thing we just did, bro. We're just going into the night. Anyways, turn 9, if you remember, on A B. If you can write it down somewhere, we're on I'm sorry, 2B 9, right? So we could stop there and then we'll come back. And I suggest you review this. Like you just go through it when you have free time at work or whatever, to be able to um, go back on that. So like, let me get what are your thoughts on that? So they're beating up the night on you, bro. You're on mute.
Like, what's the meaning? You know what I mean? Like, what are we trying to bring down? So I think last time we were speaking about like the chef of the nighttime. You know what I mean? To bring down the shefa and to understanding like where you are in relation to being a kali, being a vessel to bring this down. So are you tahor? Are you pure? Are you impure? Not just impure in a not necessarily talking about your body, your thoughts, your kavanah. So knowing the times to bring down this shefa. And then, the fact that here's a system of understanding what Hashem is considering.
Yeah.
It's not just like you said, this is what it says and this is what it is. It's like, no, it's a place for intellectual expansion within a framework of Kedusha. So it allows the potential of our human minds to progress in a positive way, in a structured way, in a way that doesn't go outside of, it doesn't go to the Sitra Akra. It's a safe space for intellectual development. It's amazing when you think
Yeah.
about it.
And the thing is too, it's like even when you go back, and it hasn't got here yet. I mean, I'm curious to see where this particular point goes. But even when you think about this idea of when you think about this idea of the idea, like when Hashem says in the beginning of the Torah, he says, "Ve'ahi erev, ve'ahi boker," right? When he says those words, what does that mean, night and day? What does that mean, night and day? Especially the fact that night and day isn't like it's not it doesn't start with the sun and the moon,
Right.
right? It starts with two different influences that are there, right? And this idea of darkness of night, is a byproduct of coming from this idea of this idea um, of the light, right? God separated the darkness and the night, right? The darkness was there, ve'choshesh, right? It was there in the beginning, right? So it's just saying that that idea of being able to be able to look at what God is saying in a new way. Now the Gemara is not going to explicitly say, "Hey, go back to Bereshit and now reread it."
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? But if you know Bereshit and you're hearing about the night, you're like, "Whoa, this is like next level." Now that we're talking about the Shema, we're talking about this dynamic of how the Shema functions, this whole thing, the different aspects of night. These aspects of night, this is the beginning of creation, right? This whole idea of the purification process that you're hearing about that comes through this 24-hour process. This is the beginning of creation. It's not just right now talking about the Shema. We're trying to understand how the Shema fits into this, right? But the premise is what's written in the text, right? The premise is this whole textual thing. So the fact that we're exploring this is like, who explores the night? Who's going into this detail on the system of God's thought? How much do you have to love God to question such a thing? Or just accept it like matter of fact? So yeah, so this whole thing is a huge concept, and we're digging into it. So yeah, it's not just it is intellectual for sure. I mean, it's a whole different level. You're gonna be sitting up tonight. You're gonna be looking at outside like, yeah, this is the first half. You know what I mean? Now the different levels. Now you can understand why some rabbis prefer to do it at this time. Why some rabbis prefer to do it at that time? Because they're connecting to different levels. Some souls need certain lights, some souls need other lights. But the whole thing is halakhically permitted. So where do you connect and why? You go by the Ben Ish Chai, you go by this guy, you go by Rambam, this guy, this, blah, blah. Maybe you got your own connection. You say, I'm holding this way. Right? You got that freedom too. Right? So it's just saying that's We're going in, but yeah, they're going in on. Wait, hold on a second. They're going in on. So anyway, so we'll revisit that on what's today, Monday. So Wednesday we'll come back to this because tomorrow we have Mishalat Yesharim. We're back there. All right, here we go. And then we're on 29, right?
Kav HaYasher,
Yeah.
I believe so. Yes, let me see. I think so. I think it is 29. Yes, yeah, we're on 29.
Yeah. All right, so we're on 29. Kav HaYasher. Rabbi Speed, keep taking us to new levels. We're so thankful to learn your safer. Hashem should bless you. He should elevate you. We should continue to grow. So it says Veda Ki um oh wow, Bilam. Veharasha. Okay, so you should know that when the wicked Bilam saw that he could not harm Israel through his sorcery, as is written, how can I curse whom God has not cursed? And it says in the Bar Midbar, he advised Balak to order the Moabite women into daughters into immorality in order to cause the Israelite men to stumble. Then, when the Israelites did indeed stumble in 24 hours, and then when the Israelites did indeed stumble, 24,000 Israelite men fell. Balaam came to collect his reward from Balak. Later on, that when Israel waged war against the Medians, Pinchas saw Balaam flying through the air, and he shouted to his soldiers and asked, it says this in the Zohar. Wait, this is crazy. He said, later on, Israel waged war against Midian, and Pinchas saw Balaam flying through the air. He was flying through the air, and he shouted to his soldiers, it says in Zohar, and asked, is there anyone who knows how to fly after this wicked one? For he saw that Balaam was flying like a bird. One man by the name of Taphalah for the tribe of Judah responded instantly. He knew how to subject the forces of impurity and to fly after him. But when the wicked one saw him coming, he cut his way through 5 levels of the atmosphere and continued flying hidden from the eye. Jeez, this is next level, bro. This is Kav HaYasher. She said the moment that Tapala found himself in pearl and suffered great anguish because he did not know what to do. Miyad Rama le Pinchas kala le hahut avira this is avira asher nachase de bo bilam bi bicha mishiach. So he says like this: Chamashia, Cham Becha Misha. Chamisha. Okay, so it's by 5. So anyway, so he says, but the right away Pinchas raises his voice and he spoke to the shadow by means of which Balaam had cloaked himself in the 5 levels of the atmosphere and commanded that it become transparent once more and to cease to conceal the evildoers. So the atmosphere became transparent once more, and Tefillah flew towards him. He succeeded in overpowering the wicked Bilam and constrained him, forcing him to come before Pinchas. How did he constrain him? Tifillah knew how to constrain the male as well as the female aspect of the chief impure forces, the sorceries both of which called Sifra Bilam. On the other hand, knew only how to overpower the male aspect. Therefore, regarding Bilam, it is written, he went through the power of Sifa, where but regards to the tribe of Dan, it is written, Dan was the snake among the road, and Siphion among the path. The path refers to the path through the atmosphere of which the wicked ones cloaked themselves. Okay, so this is like next level. So this is like some supernatural Battlestar Galactica type stuff where Bilam and them try to curse the Jews. It didn't work, and they send these girls. The girls catch them up. Plagues came. Then later, the Jews give their power, and they go to war against these people, the Minion people, and Bilam is there. He's like flying through the sky, if you could imagine. And one of Pinchas's soldiers goes up after him, brings him in front of Pinchas. He tackles him and brings him down. But the point is the saying that this guy was like concealing himself in shadows and traveling invisible, right? And so he had these types of power. This is like next level. Vekin le atid haya mahanachama. So he says, and similarly, in the future, the vengeance against Hashem's enemies will also be executed by Sifra of the tribe of Dan. Thus, when Dan arises, one should be on the lookout for Israel's redemption. As it is written, I have awaited you your salvation. It says in Berachot. When Balaam came before Pinchas and later said to him, Wicked one, how many evil tribulations have you brought upon the holy people? When Pinchas addressed Tatsaleh, go ahead and execute him, but not with the holy divine names, lest his request be fulfilled in which he asked. My let my soul die and the death be upright. Several types of gruesome deaths are executed upon him on spot. But if he did not die, Tishlan would have took a sword upon him, which was a snake that was engraved on both sides. He says, and Pentecost says to Balaam, through the very defilement with which you are engaged, you shall die. Whereupon he killed him, and Balaam was judged with the defilement of the other world. Meanwhile, the this world and all the bones disintegrated, and the flesh and the body turned into snakes and evil snakes. Even the snakes that consumed was flesh were transformed into snakes, and from the bones were also fashioned to great snakes. So I don't know what just happened. All right. So so Balaam gets killed, and he's judged by the world of impurity. And all of his bones disintegrated, and his flesh and his body turned into snakes. So all of his body, when Balaam like when his body disintegrated, Mamish turned into his whole body was so rotten. He was so rotten that he turned into snakes and evils. Even the worms that consume his flesh are transformed into snakes. Even the worms that ate him. That's how wicked this man was. My goodness. Vekin who so vekets kol gifuot maha machshifim. And so he says, in the fate of all sorcerers, their bodies will turn to snakes. This is all the wicked, all you wicked people out there. Your bodies are going to turn when you disintegrate. Your body is going to be. It's totally impure. Can you imagine the men and the women who live in society, who just do sins and they live in whoredom and all these things. When they're finished, their bodies, this is what it looks like in their coffin. Their mom is snakes. And it says, and their bodies turn into snakes and the scorpions, while their souls become male and female demons. May the spirit and the souls of all sorcerers be filled with sorrow. All the men and women who turn to sorcery deserve to be cursed, and therefore the Holy One, blessed be He, has to influence and diminish in whatever way possible. If it is certain women are known to harm Jewish children through their sorcery, it is fitting that they be pointed out by name, and that a severe ban should be replayed against them, accompanied with a shofar blowing and the extinguishing of candles in the presence of the seven Torah scrolls. Jeez. And they should be ostracized so that they have no contact with the holy community of Israel. Veda ki bilama maharasha li lichet kol mine asvima ha shayakim. So he says, and you know further that the wicked Bilam gathers all the types of herbs for use by sorcery, and then he would put them in a pot, and he would bury them in the earth 1,500 cubits below. Years later, when David Melech was excavating holes on the site of the temple to bring out of the ground waters for water libations on the altar, holes that were 15 cubits feet deep came across the plot that Balaam had buried. Jeez. So King David buried it. Could you imagine, like, you're digging up stuff, and then like these are the holes that Balaam created around the temple. Okay, this is the key point. Like by the temple, bro. This is like a huge concept. He says, and he says then, and he then removed it and then and deluged it to with diluted it with water that it was fit for libations. Concerning this is written, Moab is my wash bison, for he washed and he removed it. He removed the power of the sorcery that Moab applied. Therefore, whenever there's a suspicion of harm due to sorcery, it is a good strategy to neutralize it by reciting the 15 songs songs of ascent. This is so okay. So this is a very important thing. If you want to take a note on this point, he says, anytime you fear sorcery is being used against you, he said, read this Tehillim, chapter 120 to chapter 135. If you read those which compose at the time that David excavate those holes to bring out the underground water. Otherwise, let him pray that Hashem removes from Israel all the harm caused by sorcery. And he says, and it is also advisable for every Jewish man and woman to stay far away from sorcery as possible, and let them avoid all the acts of sorcery, urgently the divinations, and let them avoid hearing the recitations of any incantations. For the Holy and Blessed He takes pride in his people. There is no angry amongst Jacob, and there's no divination amongst Israel. He said, whoever stays far away from sorcery will be allowed to enter the partitions of the world to come, within within which even the ministering angels cannot stand. Thoughts, reflections, Kav HaYasher.
Who is Rabbi Svi? Like, who is he?
Rabbi Svi.
I mean, the
His
author,
story. I don't know, man. It's worth looking into.
man. I mean, obviously he's pulling from all the sources. It's just like,
No, but it's something very divine around the Sefer.
yeah, yeah.
It's a special kedusha. There's a certain malak that's coming down. So it definitely is something there. And if we dug into it, I'm sure we would find it's worth looking into because he's touching us. And the
Mm-hmm,
more you learn about the rabbi, you do research, Google this, whatever you can find, the closer you are to the safer. So it's a very healthy track. But I put this way: when I was learning full time,
mm-hmm,
any rabbi that we learned from, if they were buried in Israel, I was getting on the bus going to the caver
mm-hmm.
and asking, Hashem and their merit to help me learn their readings, their teaching. So the more you can learn about but Razfi, like I don't know, bro. Like I talked to a friend of mine who watches this year, and he was saying, that like I have a couple people who talks about it. One guy, in LA, but it's a friend I know that's in New Jersey. He was saying that like how for some reason like the Rabbanim they won't touch Kav HaYasher for some reason. Like no one's teaching it.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the mainstream world right now. You know what I mean? So people need it, right?
Yeah.
People need it, and we're on it. So yeah, let's do a little bit of research on Rav Svi. Maybe I'll come back with some stuff tomorrow. Maybe you come back, maybe day after, whatever. But anyway, but the point is just saying that this idea of just no shortcuts,
Mm-hmm.
right? And being in this place of just this fear of being separated from Hashem, you know, and being able to say like just under no circumstances I don't want to be separated from Hashem. I don't want to be separated from anything that Hashem wants of me, the destiny he has for me, the plans he has for me, for my family, for my siblings, for my relatives, for my community, for my country, right? Countries, and just having that in mind, like we can't deviate, right? And so we have a day, this beginning of your day, it's the middle of my day, and so we have a whole day to to be in a frame of perfection, right? And think about all of our actions throughout this day, and how many mitzvahs we can do. How many things can we stay away from? How much lashon hara can we stay away from? How much looking at anything that could separate us from Hashem, anything, and just see how much of a perfect day can we have. How much shalom bias, giving the wife nice text messages, just thinking about how beautiful you are, how amazing you are, how lucky I am to have you in my life, and they're like, "Hey, where'd that come from?" I'm in a place of hesed. I'm like the Creator. The good vibes that the Creator gives us every morning. He gives the birds chirping. He gives us a sunrise. Okay, so we should be like the Creator. We should also do beautiful things as well, right? Key thing is being kind to, our wives, being kind to the people we work with, to be fair with people, to seek patience. And then we manifest the teachings. And if we don't do it all the way perfect, we manifest that amount of the teachings. So in a 75% day, we manifest 75% of the teachings. And we do 50% and 50%, right? We don't want to go lower than that. But the point is saying we want to do 100%, right? We want to have as many perfect days as possible of consciousness throughout the day. That's why tefillah is so important to daven, right? And even if it's just hush butterdus, right? So you're at work, whatever, 10 minutes, go and talk to the Creator in a corner somewhere. People have the earphone things. People think you're talking on the phone. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? So put the earphone things in, walk around, talk to God, go back into the office, whatever it is, right? And that type of thing. So we want to stay reminded of having perfect or close to perfect days as we can every day. And so the teachings that we learn bring down the Shefa, but our behavior from the teaching is what manifests the Shefa,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And the non-Jew says, God, 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 and they bring a Shefa down, but the behavior is not there. So most of the time, the Jewish people get the Shefa,
Mm.
right? Because we got the vessel to receive it, right? She by the vessel to draw down, but the vessel to receive is a whole different thing, right? And the vessel to receive can only come through the vessel of the correction of the soul and through the mitzvot. And that's it. So, anyways, we'll finish here. Tomorrow we're continuing on. But I will say, if you can review, it's good, especially like when you wake up early, you could just review the Gemara we did if we're going to do Gemara,
Mm.
right? So tomorrow we're not doing Gemara, but the day after. So the day of that morning, you should review.
Mm.
So tomorrow morning, when you wake up early, you should review, Mishilat Hashari, right? Path to the dress, right? And Halakha, we're in 44, I think it is. So we're still in
For sure. Yeah.
Berachot Mazon, right?
Mm.
In that whole thing. So we're there. That's not such a review, but the other part is very much a review. The Mishilat Yesharim
Mm.
and the Gemara, he's saying Kav HaYasher, we just kind of like flow with it, you know what I mean, type of a thing. It doesn't
Mm.
necessarily build from one idea to the next. They're kind of like there's connection points, but it's different. You know what I'm saying? Halakha is not necessarily all in the same thread. We may jump from here to here, but the things that will be consistent are the Sepharim that we're reading, right? In this case, we're talking about Path is Just, and then also the Gemara, and so we'll just keep going on that, and we'll figure it out.
Hey Rob, something I was thinking about the connection that was made between Berachot, we're studying the watches of the night, right? And then in Kav HaYasher, we see the sorcery, right? And we were talking about how Hashem created day and night, but what is it? We don't see the sun, we don't see the moon. So what is this day and night? And it's like you were saying, there's no shortcuts. That night, that disconnection is the sorcery. That's you trying to get wherever gains, whatever your objectives are, without going through Kedusha. Maybe that's the nighttime. That's the separation that Hashem's telling us about. Don't be in night. If you are in night, use the night for let the nighttime nourish you in a sense. Let the resistance nourish you, like Yosef Azadik when he's in the prison. He's in night. He's in darkness in a sense. But through that darkness, he elevates to the highest level of kedusha. He's in a
Mm,
frame of giving, right? He's just sold, and he's taking on the shefa, and he's literally permeating the shefa throughout Malkut, throughout the whole world. So I'm trying to just seeing a connection of how we were just in Berachot, how we go to Kav HaYasher, and how it's all just interwoven, all connected. So Baruch Hashem.
No, that's very important. You just remind me something I want to share with you. Oh, 1 second. Wait, uh, 1 second. We'll end it off on this point. I want to show you one thing. All right. All right. So in this week's Torah portion, which we're going to talk about on Friday. Hold on 1 second. So I saw a really beautiful Orach Chaim on this week's Torah portion. It's kind of like connected to what you're just saying. So I just thought about it. Hold on. Okay. So it starts on Vaydaber Elohim Ed Moshe. Sorry, El Moshe Vayomer Alav Ani Hashem. So he says in God, he says, I spoke to you. I spoke. He says, God said, I spoke to Moses and said to him. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am Hashem. Right. So it says, and the next verse says, he says, Va'eram El Abraham, El Yitzhak, El Yaakov. So what is this idea of El? So Orchaim brings a very important thing. And maybe there's a connection to the 3 times of night. Maybe there's a connection to Hesed or to Fered. Yeah, it's a lot of things, right? All right. So he says like this. This is very, so it says, Va'era Abraham Elohim. So he says, I use to appear to Abraham, etc. He says, so listen to Orchaim. So the reason why I love Orchaim as a commentator is because he's like, first of all, he's so smooth, right? Because he just kind of like talks it out and he says really deep things without like forcing it on you, and he leaves it broad. We could get a lot of deep interpretation. So listen to what the Orchaim says. So the issue is, so he says, I appeared to you as Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name, the name of Hashem, right? We know the Tetragrammaton, right? So he says like this, the reason why God did not lump the 3 patriarchs together, but referred to them each one by name. So, right? So it says El Abraham, El Yitzhak, El Yaakov. So why is it to say El this? Why is it El that? Why does it do that? Why can't it just say the forefathers? That's Orchaim's question. Why is it to be the forefathers? What is the Torah trying to say to us by making this so distinctive? Right? This is the Orchaim. He wants to understand what makes it distinctive. Right? And so he says, why didn't God just lump the characters together, but refers to each one by name? That's God's relationship. He said the reason why, here's the answer, the reason why God's relationship with each one of the patriarchs was based on something unique and special to the patriarch in question. So it's an important thing. Why? Because we have the same relationship with Hashem, right? So the whole idea of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, it's not just that these words are just there for no reason. The Or Chaim is bringing down the reason why these are there is explain these attributes, to explain these attributes that are unique to individual, and they all had deep, even though they're related, they all had individual relationships with Hashem. So what does it say? Abraham was unique in that he recognized his creator without having had guidance from another human being. If someone was forsaked of the essence of God and his power, he did not deserve special credit for conducting himself in line with such knowledge. Every intelligent being who chooses good over evil once he possesses such knowledge. Abraham did not possess any of these advantages, which would which would have acquainted him with God's attributes. So he's saying, like, there's other people. Okay, you have somebody who did wrong, and they find out knowledge, and now they're truthful, right? Now they're truthful. right? And so from that dynamic, this, but Abraham didn't have anyone like that. He automatically connected. So when we're talking about this, when it says El Abraham, it's not just Abraham. Oh, a guy. No, this is a guy who's able to connect with Hashem when no one was there. There was no reality. There was no reality. There was no teacher. Okay, maybe okay, Shem and Aber. I understand. I get it. The yeshiva. I get it. Anyway, but the point is like this. So he said. So we have explained in the connection with Isaiah, chapter 41, verse 9, that the reason God called Abraham the one who loves me is it was because his faith and his morality was a result of his being a self-starter. So this is the Inyan of Abraham. He was a self-starter. He cleaved to his faith in God in spite of most demanding tests God subjected him to. So El Yitzhak. So what about Yitzhak? So we just really quick recap on Abraham. Abraham was the self-starter. There was no crew of people saying, this, just a quick story on that, because I know we got to go. I remember years ago when I went back to LA and I was first here in Israel for 6 months, and I was like becoming more yeshivish. Maybe it was a little longer than 6 months, but I was starting to wear black hat and the black and white and the seat out, the whole thing, right? And I remember when I was there, I remember I was like in a neighborhood that was an African American neighborhood, and all these people were looking at me like, "What is this guy wearing? What is he doing? Is he some type of Jew wannabe type of thing?" Right? And I just remember walking through and just remembering that like I was there and I was like kind of like an outcast, but I was able to go right over the hill and go to a kosher place to get something to eat, and everything I was wearing was normal by them, right? And so, but Abraham didn't have that. Abraham was just him by himself. So Orkheim says by Isaac, Isaac possessed another unique characteristic. He had submitted without question to his father's request made in the name of God to give his life for God. He did not even ask for an explanation as why, as he was given his life. So Yitzhak represents total submission. Submission beyond logic, submission with beyond everything. Ve'el Yaakov. Yaakov was unique, was that he did not waste a single drop of semen by producing an offspring which was not worthy of him. All of his children remained loyal to his teachings. So wait, all Jacob was unique in not wasting a single drop of seed by producing offspring which was not worthy of him. All right, maybe his sons make sins. Okay, fine. All of his children stayed loyal to his teachings. Okay, so and God explained to Moses that he had not revealed his attributes of the four letters name which he had revealed to Moses to any of the main three patriarchs, but had revealed to them only the attributes of Shaddai. God now told Moshe that in the view of his revelation, he had already made him. He had instead integrated by speaking to him in an appropriate manner. That's a whole other thing. But the point I wanted to say it's just that idea of being able to go into these attributes of the creator, the attributes of ourselves, and to be able to see the uniqueness in our relationship. Like, what is our thing, right? That's the thing I wanted to think about is this idea, like, Abraham had this ability that he talked to God when no one else was, really teaching that and that whole thing. And he was a self-starter and he made things happen. And Yitzhak, was ready to be selfless for his father no matter what. Jacob, he produced these children, these holy children that he was made higher than, but they nevertheless stayed connected to his teachings. So what about us as individuals? Because we're in the same helak. We're in the same influence. We're in the same expression of Hashem, right? So like, what is our thing? What are we going to be known for, right? Because we're not saying from a reference, right? Because all of us have a unique gift, a unique ability, and our job is to bring it out. And the Torah explains it's through the Torah and the mitzvot that we remove the klipa from the neshama, and as the neshama is able to flourish, the uniqueness expresses in the world, right? So just something to think about, just the rest of the day, just this idea of like, you know, what is going to be my unique contribution to the world? You talked about it a little bit in your voice note with your family, the lineage, but carving that out more, right? Carving that out more on an individual basis of, okay, this is what makes me unique. This is my thing. I think one of the things that makes me unique is that I've been able to do a lot of really great things, but I'm not better than anybody. You know what I mean? I'm not like way smarter than anybody. I'm not way like more this or more that, whatever. I'm just like pretty much like a regular guy that people could connect to, Like it's not like, oh, I could never be like him. I nothing about me is like that. I'm the opposite, right? Like if he could do it, for sure I could do it. So I think that's one of the things I bring to the table is God gave me a presentation where I'm relatable and I can connect, and in my journey, it's like, oh, people are like, wow, he did that. He grew up this way. Maybe I could think about things. You know what I mean? Like that type of thing. So, but I think the simplicity of that, but I think that comes from a very great place of elevation too, as well. So it's not to like limit myself. It's just saying how God made me. You know what I mean? And embracing that, and embracing that, and using it as a way to do as many mitzvahs while we're here. You know what I mean? And that type of thing. So, just think about ourselves. Think about when I say ourselves, like our mission to other people, right? In that dynamic and why you work. Like so many of the great sages taught their students to go to work and do jobs that they were busy with their hands. Why? He said because they could focus their mind on Torah while they're using their hands.
Mm-hmm.
If they had jobs that were very intellectual, then that could disrupt their time of thinking about Torah, right? So if we're using our hands in our work, that's beautiful. It's holy, right? Just think about God, contemplate these ideas, contemplate these thoughts, this, blah, blah, speak to Hashem, all these things, be kind to our coworkers, this, do kiddush Hashem, all these things. Anyways, Baruch atah Adonai,